Let's talk about browser applications. My name's Robin Ward, although you might actually know me better as my online persona, Evil Trout. Let's talk about web forums for a minute. They look like this. They have an avatar on the side, they have content in the middle, people come to them and discuss various topics. I actually know a fair bit about forums. A few years ago, a friend and I made this game called Forum Wars, where you could go online and roleplay an internet user on fake internet forums. It also had its own forum section where the players of the game could discuss things with each other. So yes, I made a fake forum environment on the internet that had forums where people could roleplay with each other. Online forums are actually nothing new. They've existed a lot longer than, for example, the modern web browser. When I was a kid, I used to use a modem to dial local BBSs or bulletin board systems where people would discuss things. They're not all that different from modern forums, except that they're text-based. As you can see here, people type messages to each other, they log out, and they come back and then see what people have written to them. These days, a lot of people prefer instant messaging to forums. I guess it's a lot easier, since they only have to think about one sentence at a time. It's also a side effect of just how pervasive the internet is these days. People have it on their cell phones, on airplanes, just about everywhere. I have this totally unscientific theory about it that as network ubiquity increases, the length of communication decreases because you're so connected that you don't have to write these long thoughts. But I also think that there's a serious downside to this, because I think that some kinds of communication, for example Twitter, aren't as good as paragraphs in many cases. In particular, it's really easy to misunderstand people when they write just 140 characters at a time. I'm no better. Here's a screenshot of a Twitter fight I had over something stupid that doesn't even matter. Don't get me wrong, I really like Twitter and other kinds of shorter forms of communication. It's just that I think there's something to be said for paragraphs, and allowing people to flesh out ideas in detail and communicate with each other over a longer period of time. Another nice thing about forums is that they tend to be decentralized. In other words, there's no large corporation like Facebook running them all. They tend to be set up based on user interests, and they have them for just about anything under the sun. If there's something you're interested in and you Google it, you'll probably find a forum for it. One of the oldest forum communities on the web is called the Straight Dope. This is a screenshot from the Internet Archive of the forum as it looked in the year 2000. And this is what the Straight Dope looks like today. Can you think of any other product in the internet's history that looks virtually identical 13 years later? It's kind of ridiculous. If we're going to be honest, the current state of web forums just sucks. I've thought this for a long time, so I was really happy when I met up with Jeff Atwood, you might know him as Coding Horror from his famous blog about programming, and started talking about this, and we decided to do something about it. That thing is called Discourse, and it's fully open source forum software. Our goal isn't just to bring forum software into the current decade, but it's to think about where's forum software going to be in the future. We wanted something that was going to last us for a really long time. We're approaching this in a few different ways. One way is infinite scrolling. These days, forums typically break conversations into pages, so you have page 1, 2, 3, etc. However, it really breaks down when you're on page 20 or 21, or what does page 1000 versus 1001 mean? We're really interested in keeping it so that you can just scroll down and just keep reading for as long as you want, but it's really important that we don't break the back button. Another thing we care about is keeping track of what you've read and how long you've been reading it. Most forum software these days will consider a whole page of posts read if you just enter that page, even if you didn't read anything and then hit the back button, so that's obviously not very good. Another thing we do is keep track of works in progress or drafts. There's nothing worse than if you're spending a long time writing many paragraphs of text with a really good argument and then accidentally closing your browser or having to leave for dinner or something like that and losing all your work, so we make sure to keep that around. That's just a few of the features that we had in mind. As you can imagine, we have many more that we want to get around to if we ever have time. One thing we did know is that we'd have a lot of JavaScript in this application, so we looked into ways of managing that code. Prior to Discourse, I'd worked on a large web application that had a lot of jQuery code, and managing it just became a huge pain, so I was really eager to look into the so-called client-side MVC frameworks that existed. Now, client-side MVC is actually a little different than server-side MVC. The basics are the same. You have a model that represents your data, you have a view that displays it, and you have a controller that wires it all together. I'm not actually that crazy on the term client-side MVC because I think it confuses more developers than it helps. Most people are familiar with the server-side framework, and when they try to translate it into client-side concepts, they have a difficult time. If you've done server-side programming before, you're used to a workflow that looks a bit like this. The client says, hey, I want some data, and asks the server for it. Then the server does a little work, packages it all up, and then sends it back to the client. Now, this model has been proven to work. I mean, most applications on the internet are still built this way, but it seems a little wasteful because the server does all this work to generate this HTML for the client, and then the client kind of just throws it away the next time the user clicks on a link. In a client-side MVC application, or as I prefer to call them, browser applications, you can remember state as the user is navigating around your application. Here are a few reasons why I think browser applications are awesome. The first is that it encourages API-first development. A browser application typically consumes a server API. Many sites like GitHub and Dropbox have APIs these days so that other developers can build applications on top of them. Discourse has a full JSON API. On most of our URLs, for example, you can just add a JSON extension and get back the data we use to render that view. The awesome thing is that we know that it works because we've battle tested it. Our site literally wouldn't work if the API broke. Another reason why browser applications are awesome is that they work really well with CDNs. CDNs make your site faster. A well-designed browser application can serve all its templates from a CDN and only contact the server for the JSON data it needs. You might be wondering, how much data do the templates use? Well, the answer is not as much as you'd think. Discourse's current release only sends 286K of minified and JZip JavaScript from a CDN. To contrast, BaseCamp Next, a site which uses a library called TurboLinks to do mostly server-side rendering, actually clocks in with slightly more JavaScript. Number 3. If you render on the client side, you can display the same data in different ways. This is a screenshot from BaseCamp Next. That red arrow there is a filter that changes how your projects are listed. Here I'm viewing them as cards, but I could display them as a list of rows if I wanted. The interesting thing about this is that all the data to display the projects in a different way is already present on the client side. However, because BaseCamp does all its rendering on the server side, when I click the filters, it doesn't know how to display them differently without going all the way back to the server to get more HTML. It's very wasteful. Here's my user view on Discourse. By default, it shows a stream of my recent activity. If I hit the Preferences button, though, it'll display a form pre-populated with my user's details so I can change them. Now, because Discourse does all its rendering on the client side, when I click that link, it doesn't have to make any request to the server. It can just display the form with the user details that I already had in memory. Number 4. Now this one's really cool. When a user submits data to the server, say by posting on a topic on Discourse, that's an asynchronous operation. What most applications will do is show a spinner, and then update the page with some HTML that it gets back from the server when the operation succeeds. Now the interesting thing about Ajax requests is that they rarely fail. Something like 99% of the time the post will just go through as planned. Discourse takes advantage of this and assumes success. The second you click Submit, it renders the post in the topic right away, since it knows how to render anything. Now what about in that 1% of time? Well, in that case, the user gets a bad experience. If there's an error making the Ajax request, we'll reverse what we just did and remove the post from the stream. This experience can be a bit jarring, because a user might see the post appear and then disappear a second later, but the truth is this rarely happens. I think you should optimize your user experience for the case that happens the majority of the time. Your browser application will feel much snappier. The fifth thing I wanted to mention is bindings. Bindings are a clever way of updating your templates dynamically. Discourse is written in Ember.js, which uses the handlebars templating language. When you put an expression inside double braces, Ember.js is smart enough to bind it to your application's data. Then, whenever you change the underlying data, the template will update automatically. It's much cleaner than updating a value with jQuery or something like that, and the benefit is that your data isn't tied to your HTML, so you can change the structure of your DOM as much as you want, and the values will continue to update. Finally, I wanted to talk about organization. One of the major strengths of using a client-side framework is that they give you a structure for organizing your code. Now, I've seen far too many monolithic JavaScript projects with gigantic files that are impossible to follow for my tastes. Structure is a good thing. You don't even have to think about where to put your files or constructs once you learn your way around. Things just fall into place. Finally, I'd like to address some common concerns people have with building browser applications. A lot of people seem to think that search engines can't index browser applications. The truth is actually that they can, it's just a little more work is involved. In fact, Discourse has been indexable by Google since day one. You just have to do a little more work with serving up simple versions of your page or using the Ajax crawling API. Another is that they have poor performance. Well, I hope that I've shown that in many cases they can have much better performance, but the truth is that if you're on a platform that has a really poor JavaScript runtime, you might want to think twice about loading it down with a lot of JavaScript. Fortunately, such platforms are fewer and far between these days. Some people are concerned about progressive enhancement. They expect JavaScript to just enhance the HTML that's already present on a page. The thing is that's really limiting. I mean, let's say you wanted to build something like Photoshop in a browser. How could that possibly degrade into basic HTML? I think those people aren't thinking big enough. I've heard it said that browser applications are bad from an accessibility point of view, But this isn't actually true. Screen readers these days are really powerful pieces of software. They can read just about anything in the DOM. And if that wasn't enough, there's the Y-ARIA extensions to HTML that browser applications have supported forever and will continue to support because it's just basic markup that'll make your applications even more accessible to people in the future. And finally, there's a concern that it's hard to learn how to build browser applications. Well, this one might actually be true. I mean, if you're a server-side developer, it could be a totally different set of skills than you're used to using. I mean, controllers and views, they mean really different things in the client-side world than they do in the server-side world. If you're not great at JavaScript, for example, if you've just used it for jQuery carousels or simple drop-downs or something like that, you might have to shape up a bit. But having said that, I think you can build many kinds of applications that you couldn't otherwise, and I think you'll be a better developer. Some things are worth learning, and I think this is one of them, so yeah, give it a shot.